Thank you. So first of all, it's supposed to be a very interactive session. So feel free to raise your hands and yell if you don't like what we are going to say. I hope the microphone will be out there so that you can really participate in this discussion in a very interactive way. And to the panelists, thank you very much for being here. Maybe I give a very short floor to each one of you, just 1 minute to describe why are you here and what makes you wake up in the morning. What are kind of the driving forces in your life?
Sure, can you hear me? Excellent, okay, great. So my name is Mazen Gadir. I'm a quantum physicist who jumped into healthcare in the last 23 years, just to give you an introduction. Why am I here? It's my second time. I think the energy and the content is very exciting, and also the innovation. The topics that are being discussed are very relevant in the day and age. So I'm excited for networking, getting to see some of the amazing stuff that you're doing here. I live in Dubai, so I get exposed to a lot of things. You're like light years ahead. Quantum light years ahead, right? Quantum. So I come here, quantum leap, go back to reality, and I'm like, oh my goodness. What wakes me up every morning? I've been in healthcare for the last 23 years, and to be honest, what wakes me up every morning, how healthcare is a huge, complex industry, and how can you simplify it to save lives? I mean, saving lives shouldn't be that complex. So I enjoy trying to understand, because I thought quantum physics is complicated, but it's not. Healthcare is much more complicated.
Thank you, Mazen. Silja.
Yeah, my name is Silja Elunurm. Nice to meet you all. I'm really happy that there is so many of you interested in health tech, actually. I'm a qualified attorney at law, currently regulatory head in microinvention. And well, my journey has been purely regulatory in these terms. I have enjoyed different types of norms in my life. And now I have found that medical technology and everything surrounding it, especially medical devices production, is something really for these lawyers who enjoy the challenge. So this makes me up also every morning, and this I'm trying to translate to the people who are maybe not so fluent with a regulatory language. So this is who I am, what I do.
Thank you. Sergey?
Right, so my name is Sergey. Super happy to, I cannot say I can see you because I'm not wearing my glasses, so you're all blended in. But so I run what is now sort of a small household name for early stage longevity tech investments in the industry. I run a fund which is called Longevity, together with my two other partners. I have been sort of on both sides of the river. So I've been a founder most of my life, and then I transitioned into working with therapeutics, so pharma, essentially preclinical pharma companies. Built a company in the clinical trial space, and then we started a fund. What wakes me up in the morning is a bit of a complicated question. But realistically, so we in longevity industry and investing in longevity industry, we basically live by a very simple motto, which means we didn't become scientists to actually invent a treatment for any sort of age-related disease, but we do have the resource to facilitate someone and to assist someone to make it happen. So that's why we're here. Not only for the multiplier, okay? So we also have the ideological goal.
Yeah. Thanks for that. So if you notice that we are perfectly capable of discussing of the different aspects of healthcare because we don't have medical doctors here, so so good for that. So maybe a first question to you, Mazen. Being in a big international company who is dealing really with data, okay? So from your point of view, why it's so difficult to make the healthcare patient-centric? Are there any anchors, or maybe there are a couple of points that we should push together, and we could make this ship sailing away?
That's a very good question. Thank you, Erki. And so having lived in IQVIA for the last 4 years and understood new parts of the health economy, why is it so difficult to move it into patient-centric? The stakeholders that play in healthcare are so many and so diverse. And I love the slide you showed before where you had the pharma on one side, the providers on the other side, and the big other players. But don't forget, you have insurance companies now coming in. You have regulators that wanted to actually come and control the data privacy and patient information and information security and whatnot. So moving it to the patient centricity part has been difficult because the so many players who wanted to own it. Some of them are clinical, for example, hospitals and clinics, and they see themselves as the rightful custodians of such data. Some of them are benefactors. Pharma companies, they see the monetization part of it. Insurance companies have just been slotted in now to try and see, okay, how data should actually, I'm in charge of the members' data for my members' insurance plans. So every perspective, I think it's a huge healthcare pie to be split. You mentioned it's an $8 trillion to $9 trillion economy worldwide, and the amount of data that they are fighting for, believe it or not, as your slide showed, is actually the 5% that gets generated in hospitals. So imagine how much control these different stakeholders want to jump on if we are opening up for 95% of the rest of the data. But again, patient centricity has been always the difficult equation to focus on due to the many players coming in. However, COVID-19 has shown the rise of the customer convenience, the customer control of data. But again, I still think it's a difficult equation because of the many stakeholders.
Okay, yeah, very, very good points. So, Sergey, have you invested in the companies that want to break things, or are you cautious as the venture capitalist and you want to improve things? Maybe you can give a couple of examples on the both extremes, because we have heard a couple of times today that don't break things. It's not working in the healthcare.
Right. So it's a very good question, and I'm not saying this to compliment you. It's actually a good question. So the reason why is, so in biotech, if you look at the therapeutic side of biotech, right? If you look at age-related diseases, a lot of drug development and a lot of innovation is actually happening iteratively, right? So you're marginally improving over the current standard of care, and you eventually arrive at something marginally better, more efficient, more sensitive, more specific, whatever that is if we're talking about the diagnostic. Now, some of the companies are actually breaking things, and this is where we're talking about these sort of paradigm shifts between a standard of care now versus reimagining it altogether. So a very good example is, so we have a company in our portfolio which is called Turn Biosciences, it's a Stanford spin-out. They're pretty well off now. They are doing what you call epigenetic reprogramming. So the nature of epigenetic reprogramming is that you can basically switch on and off certain processes in cells, which they have lost the ability to perform because of our aging, because of accumulating DNA damage, et cetera, et cetera. Now, what this means is that we're essentially qualitatively stepping away from the standards of care in, for example, skin regeneration, in ophthalmology, because we're now talking about retinal rejuvenation, or even in immuno-oncology, right? So that's one example. Another example is where we're not breaking things, but we're improving how we work with existing things, right? So another company that we have in the portfolio, for example, is the company called Precomp Therapeutics. So they are out of Switzerland, and what they're capable of doing is they're capable of growing very fast, rapidly growing an ex vivo, so outside of the patient, tumor organoid, right? Essentially a clone of patient's tumor, and we're talking about solid tumors here, obviously. And then rapidly testing multiple treatment combinations of that tumor, understanding what the response is, and kind of reverting back to the patient with a personalized regimen of care. We're still talking about essentially playing around with the very same drugs, right? But the combination of drugs might be different and unique for every patient. So this is where we're not breaking things. This is where we are kind of improving on things.
But radically improving?
Yes, radically improving. So the response rates are 50-60% higher than without this approach. Generally speaking, though, and the last point I want to make, the industry, like the biotech industry, and specifically therapeutics, have of course developed gradually, right? So even if you look at chemo is a very good example. Hands up, who knows how we actually ended up with chemotherapy in cancer? Anyone? So the idea of chemotherapy in cancer actually came about in the First World War after the chemical gas attack, the mustard gas attack, when they took the cadavers out of the field and they realized that the tumors, they've observed tumor shrinkage. And this is where we came a long way, 100 years, right? We came to the point where we are doing combination therapies, et cetera, et cetera. So it's mostly iterative, right? It's mostly gradual improvements, but some things are breaking the paradigm.
Okay, thank you very much. Celia, you have been practicing law. You have been employed by the ministry. Now you are in the startup. Maybe you have the answer. What are the couple of buttons we have to push to get this ship sailing?
To get the person-centeredness sailing. So first of all, yeah, we have a lot of data actually everywhere. Yeah, this is true, but we need to have a meaningful, actionable data. So this is, I think, the key to everything. It needs to be meaningful and actionable to both sides, to patients, to practitioners. It doesn't matter if we collect an enormous amount of data, but we, first of all, cannot do anything with it because it's interoperability is bad or semantic is bad or whatever. So this is one side, I think. So the data needs to be such that we can actually build on something on top of it. Other side is the whole ecosystem. Of course, we have in Estonia, in all countries, there is already these ecosystems are developing, but still the way how people are maybe cooperating, how we actually bring these new innovative ideas from the university, for example, to the entrepreneurship and later on to the market. So the whole pathway needs to improve. Only then we can actually have real products fast on the market. Because currently in Estonia, at least, we see that there are still some gaps. A lot of happening in university, but quite often it stays there. So why? We need to find a way how to incentivize bringing the innovation to the market.
Is it a technical question? Is it a regulatory question? Or is it a trust question? Or
I think there is different types of questions involved. For example, to produce a medical device, it's first of all a long journey. It's a really heavily regulated path. Yeah, it requires clinical trials. It's a long-term process. It's not a sprint. It's a marathon. So there needs to be also a proper backup financing behind, and there needs to be also a good business model, how eventually these products that will be put on the market, how they will be financed, who will pay for them. So okay. This is the question.
Very good. Hold that thought.
Yeah, okay.
So next question to both of you, Mazin and Sergey. You have seen companies around the world. And we know that the US is leading by far the innovation in this field. So what makes them different, or what are the differences between what you see in different parts of the world? From the perspective how the teams of the startups are tackling the question, and how the ecosystem is really taking these new solutions on board. So I don't know, who wants to start?
Can I start?
Mazin, kick it off.
Okay, sure. Fantastic. So from a regulatory perspective, if we in relation to the point you mentioned, the ecosystem. So the US is leading innovation from the production or the life cycle from research into production, into commercialization, and that is excellent in that sense. But there are other jurisdictions that are coming up now globally in other regions because of the lack of regulation. So they don't have, for example, mature GDPR regulation or HIPAA regulation that allows a lot more I guess deregulation allows more innovation to come up and pop up from different areas. So I think from an ecosystem perspective, regulation and the tightening of regulation in the West has opened up pockets of innovation elsewhere, in the East. Let's make it that way, if you think about it that way. Number two, the lack of connection between research and commercialization is prominent in some areas in the East, but it's actually compensated for because of the good connection between research and commercialization in, for example, or research and academia and industry in the West. So there are, I guess, certain pros and cons in some areas that allows innovation to pop up in some areas, especially when it comes to regulation. And there are still some areas that are considered excellent and outstanding in the area of innovation due to the closeness between industry and research. And Estonia is an example to that. But that's just my angle from an ecosystem perspective.
No, it's a wonderful angle. I mean, my points will be complementary. So I do have two, right? So one is US and Europe. I'm trying to be politically correct here. So US and Europe have two very, and by Europe I mean Eastern Europe very much, and then the old part of Europe sort of 50-50-ish. Have very different hygiene of commercializing intellectual property, right? So all the deep tech eventually originates in research institutions, right? So Harvard, Stanford, Sorbonne's, whatever, ETH, Zurich's of the world. Now, and then we come to the mechanism of how these institutions of the world actually spin out IP and how they tackle its commercialization. Now, in the US, it's a very streamlined process, right? Whenever a group of researchers actually comes up with something potentially valuable in the lab, the institution itself incentivizes this group and sort of provides all the vehicles, exclusive licensing agreements, et cetera, to relocate the IP into the company, attach the entrepreneurial component to it, and throw it out there to raise money from venture capitalists, right? So the institution has covered for the fundamental research, for the fundamental science part, and now it's ready for the pre-seed or whatever preclinical funding. Now in Europe, we're still kind of trying to grasp how to do it properly, right? So how to do it on that scale and that automated.
So are you saying that actually speed is important for you?
Speed of spinning out intellectual property, speed of understanding that this piece of science can be valuable, but can be valuable in a certain time frame, mind you, because the progress is not stationary, right? This is very important, right? And this is why MIT's, Harvard, Stanford's are so successful in spinning out intellectual property. And then the second part is availability, very low availability of non-equity instruments in Europe as compared to the grants and non-equity instruments in the US, right? Because eventually every piece of science needs to transform from fundamental science, which is not fundable by VCs because it's fundamental science and doesn't have the focus, into something that has the focus, has the disease indication, and at least some sort of vague timeline of going ahead, right? So going forward. And in the US, the system is much more inclined. It's still flawed. Most of the funding still ends up with big institutions, but still, like the system provides you with liquidity, non-dilutive liquidity, as a researcher to actually arrive at the stage when you're fit for VC funding.
So maybe follow-up question, and then I'll come to you, Celia, as well. So is there anything that the companies from this part of the world are missing compared to the others? Is there any kind of particular thing that you think that, hey, there is a room for improvement? And by this part of the world, I mean Northern Europe and Baltics and this region.
Well, I can start. Freedom to operate with their IP.
IP?
Yes, I've seen dramatic examples of local universities providing or trying to spin out IP on the terms which are then unfundable by any venture capitalist. Like no one in their sane mind will actually go on that deal. So that's the first part. The second part, Western teams. And I hate to say that, Western teams are very rarely understaffed on the entrepreneurial part. What that means is that we're kind of, as a biotech investor, even early stage, when we look at the US pipeline, we're kind of blessed with the situation where there are no random people in these teams, right? So these are ex-AstraZeneca, ex-Pfizer, whatever, people that have very solid track record and that have joined, right? So and that is very often a weak spot for Eastern Europe for sure.
Okay.
You made me think about this because, again, it's a great question. I think in my part of the world where I've lived, if I see companies coming from this side to that side, what would be missing from them would be, I think, number one is visibility and awareness of the market. Because I think the research, the science is pretty robust. The capital investment is pretty robust in the West, but flexibility and visibility into the market that they want to get in. And guts. They have to have guts to go in and find and talk and negotiate partnerships. That's what I think. You have the basics all well and done in this part of the world. I think extending that extra visibility, that extra flexibility to dive into this, to the chaotic part of the world that could actually generate more population, samples. You can have more B2C capabilities there, undiscovered because it's not regulated, well regulated like the West, but it's high profit margins. So do you have the guts to actually venture into the East or into Africa with no regulation, considering the fact that you've cemented your basics, your IP, your science, your funding, and whatnot?
Very quickly, I have another one. We need to improve our ability to sell ourselves. We're very often not worse, we're actually even better in terms of the scientific pedigree, but we have zero ability to sell ourselves. We always sell ourselves cheap, and we cannot promote ourselves properly. That's an issue.
That's a good point. Celia, and I'm going to simplify a little bit. When we look at the kind of approach to data, then we have three systems in the world. In the US, everything belongs to the companies. In China and around, everything belongs to the government. In Europe, we own it. Okay? So how easy or difficult it is for the company coming from this part of the world who has to deal with data really to move as fast as the companies in the US and in China, because intuitively, in the company, it takes only a couple of decisions to start moving. In the government, if it's in the policies, then they're already moving, okay? We are a little bit kind of stuck with kind of data, aren't we, in Europe?
You mean, I guess you are aiming to the GDPR and its constraints in regard of data management. To be honest, I wouldn't really say that GDPR is a problem, because maybe it's misunderstood in some contexts, and maybe the knowledge of GDPR principles is not so well spread. Of course, there might be questions that how well you define your processing activities and all this this kind of legal details, and can you further process or so on. But there are possibilities in GDPR. So sometimes I would say that GDPR is overly complicated or conservatively interpreted. So this might be a problem. So we could actually innovate there also a little bit more, and lawyers should be more like with a broader mind, not so narrowing mind. So this I would say, but actually US GDPR protection rules are not so different nowadays anymore from the EU. So I wouldn't say that we are like in a really bad position, but yeah, there are some differences, this I would just say, and you need to understand it. But what I want to say that GDPR was at this time when it was created, it was really a good piece of legislation. Why? Because it was a technology neutral, sector neutral, and it didn't create any kind of specific rules for any kind of sector. So now in Europe, I see this tendency of regulating separate sectors, and this I see actually as a problem. For example, this European health data space, it may seem like a super piece of legislation, but if we think that in upcoming 10 years we will have then, I don't know, a wood data marketplace, I don't know, food data marketplace, some kind of environmental data marketplace. So all these will be regulated separately. So this I see as a problem. Currently, okay. GDPR is a really little soft piece of legislation. Of course, we need to follow it, but I think it gives the possibility to maneuver, and it's not so bad. But I would say that European health data space, it may bring good things, especially in regards of person-centeredness, because it will really say that people will have the right to claim the data. So this will be really written down 100%, and there is nothing against it. But in some pieces, it's a problematic piece. So people, be careful when you read about it, when you hear about it. It may seem super fun thing, but I see some warning signs there, actually.
So do we have any questions from the audience? Just raise the hand, and we probably can have the microphone there. There is one in the front seat.
Yep, and here is the mic.
Hi, thank you very much. I think it was a really nice discussion, and I just didn't hear anything about what you said before. As now we have the sick care, and we want to move to the health plus care. And my question is really that I see, and maybe my generation is a bit different, I miss in the healthcare the approach of the design first, or design at least as a part of the feature of the, if it's an app, if it's a wellness solution and everything. Of course, when we talk about sick care, the main feature is to heal a person, to treat the disease. But when we talk about the wellness, I see that there is a lot of people that dismissing, and the startup that's missing the really design first approach. So my question is, what do you think about that, and if it will be changed, by whom it's supposed to be changed?
Oh, thank you very much. Very good question. Maybe Silja, you can start as the startup, and then if you have any comments, then you can continue. And if someone from the audience wants to answer this, then you are feel free to do it.
Yeah, so from the startup side, I would say that actually when you build something, you need to understand what are your user needs. So without this, you can build whatever million things, but nobody will not use it, nobody will not purchase it, nobody will not compensate it in the end. So you actually need to solve some real problem, and solve it this way that both sides of the kind of user side, so the user or the patient, and also the professional would understand it. So in this sense, this co-design or like cooperation between different parties, I think here is a super relevant thing. And in MicroEngine, we really deal with it a lot. We ask from our users, from our professionals, what they actually need, what they want. So this is the key to the success, I think, in every different types of sectors, but especially also in health tech.
So Mazin, if you buy companies, and you buy companies, is design important for you?
I mean, if I talk about the corporation that I represent, they buy based on, obviously, a few criteria, right? Revenue generation, EBITDA, data, right? As long as there is data that gets accumulated using this platform, as long as there's positive EBITDA that comes in, and a positive revenue generation on a yearly basis, that's how corporate looks at it from a black and white perspective.
But good design kind of helps it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And if you can work your way from those three criteria into the likeliness or the beautification of that platform, and how can it
how
solve,
engaging it is.
Exactly, how convenient. And again, I emphasize the word convenience, because if I'm a citizen, a resident, a human being who wants to use an app, how convenient is it? So our corporation would look at obviously the three criteria based on the design and how sustainable that platform.
So Sergey, in the early stages, it's more like a tech and team question, not a design question, or you pay attention to design as well?
Well, that depends what we're looking at. So there are industries and there are applications where the design, well, the UX UI part of the solution is actually the make it or break it factor. Now, I'm talking specifically about anything that deals with, okay, take clinical trials, okay? So in clinical trials, one of the biggest bottlenecks is finding the patients for clinical trials to begin with, like understanding where they are, which is not a trivial job, and I think Mazin can sort of confirm on that, right? So IQVIA does a lot of patient recruitment, and it's not easy. And then once you have recruited and randomized patients for your trial, at the moment when you want to digitize their experience and digitize the patient journey, you have one key metric kicking in, and that is retention, right? So you need to retain patients in this process. whenever you ask them something, whenever you ask for their additional consent, you need to make it engaging. You need to give something back to the patient, so there should be some sort of reward mechanism. Some even go down the road of gamification of this process now. So you need to keep them engaged, keep them in the trial. Now, the thing that no one talks about, interestingly enough, is, so patient engagement everyone talks about. The thing that no one talks about is HCP engagement. So the actual
HCP, please, for the audience.
Healthcare professional, right? So clinician, the doctor engagement. Doctors should also enjoy using the tool, right? Because otherwise it will not be adopted in the clinical setting at all if you create complications for clinicians instead of making their life easier. So these two are of tremendous importance. And this is the example where design first approach can actually speed up a very, very, very crucial part of drug development process, which is clinical trials, and save like a ton of money in the process. Because normally, like your normal patient dropout rate, which you're looking at in clinical trials, is up to 50% with traditional sort of analog CRO setting, right? So yeah, I mean, this is the example of the industry where this is like the key component.
Great. Any more questions from the audience now? Don't be shy. Yes, please. Second row there.
Hello, dear speakers. Thank you for a great panel. I want to ask you a question about the role of insurance companies. They're a big stakeholder in the healthcare system. Traditionally, they have built their message, and their sales strategy on the fear of losing something, your health, your ability to work, your kind of joy of the life. But still, even they're showing that what can go wrong. Do you see that insurance companies can play a role towards shifting the mindset of consumers or like patients from, only focusing on kind of treating diseases towards, how to live longer life?
Thank you.
That's an excellent question, especially if it affects their margins. Don't forget, because insurance companies at the end of the day, and I'd love you to follow a guy called Dr. Eric Brickman. He is actually a LinkedIn content producer. He's actually a physician, but he talks about insurance companies and profitability of insurance companies. But they can drive consumer behavior, specifically if pushing them towards wellness and prevention would actually reduce their admissions and chronic disease viability. So again, I think they're a great player because again, it helps them save up money. So a byproduct, they can be a lever to drive innovation, to push wellness and prevention and more innovation in the area of social determinants of health and outside the hospital care, because that would affect their market share, their revenues and whatnot, and they could influence. And they have a big lobby. If you look at the U.S., for example.
But isn't it a way that the startup, like this lady is running, they can produce the clinical data and the clinical proof? Because the insurance companies, they need the proof and data, not only the promises. Absolutely, absolutely. And then I think it goes also, it's related to how you market it. Because if you tell a story and sometimes you solve a basic issue that would then generate an impact on the dollar sign that brings in, absolutely. A startup could actually target that area and bring in the insurance companies, especially the big ones, right? The Aetnas, the Cignas, who are advocates of such behavioral change within the consumer population to try and obviously reduce expenditure in hospital care, which is the most expensive one. So, Celia, do you see the similar approach that Mazen now explained in the governmental insurance institutions? Are they kind of motivated by the same things, or is it a completely different world?
I think it could be, because in the end, well, the public money is maybe different in a sense that public insurance fund doesn't have to really earn the profit as such, but still the resources are limited, and we know Estonian health insurance fund budget is not really in a good place at the moment, and we see that the place where they are is getting worse with every year. Yeah? So the trend needs to change. We cannot do this. We need to change. So somehow it needs to change. So the way to change it is to really shift from this standard care financing model. So we only treat. We need to put the more focus to the prevention, to the person's own ability to control and to influence their own health, to take the charge of their own health. But I would say the insurance fund in Estonia really needs to also, how to say, maybe encourage or educate people that what actually we should do and how to make this change ourselves. And here also health technology can really easily help. It's a really perfect place how to kick in with the technology.
So Sergey, how do you evaluate or analyze the company who is asking for your money? How do you evaluate their ability to prove to the insurance company that it is worth starting reimbursing this solution? Do you have some kind of complicated models? Is it too early for you? Tell us through the thinking behind the venture capitalist. How do you analyze this part of the equation?
Good question. The short answer to your question would be no, we're not. I'll explain why. So if we're talking about therapeutics, essentially everything that improves over the standard of care, and we're spending most of our time in immuno-oncology, neurodegenerative, sort of gene editing part of science, right? So whatever improves outcomes there, with the probability of 99% it gets reimbursed, right? In the US healthcare system, for sure. And we now see that with so few Alzheimer's drugs that have appeared, right? So the infamous aducanumab, for example, which doesn't work, it's still reimbursed, right? So very limited clinical data, FDA was forced to approve it, but it's reimbursed. So in therapeutics, it's not on the table, really, as an evaluation point. Now, in the non-therapeutics, so in the diagnostics segment, we do look at the reimbursement possibility, but we spend a lot of time when we're talking about, for example, digital therapeutics, and any sort of interactive ways of engaging patient and trying to improve certain clinical outcomes, where the company will be actually charging the patient for using the solution, right? And the reason for that is, it is sometimes very hard for these companies to actually prove the improvement in the clinical outcome. And this is where we spend time on it. In companies where we're looking at early stage diagnostics of diseases which are now not diagnosed properly at the very early stage, and we have a couple of examples with ovarian cancer, for example, this stuff, again, it gets reimbursed pretty much automatically, because for insurance providers, it is in their best interest to actually get the disease caught very early and then not paying for the whole therapeutic procedure, right, for the patient.
But by the way, in the digital world, is the logic okay for you if a wellness company comes to you and saying, hey, we have been operating in the wellness world, we know nothing about the regulations, but we want to try to go into the digital therapeutics or into the regulated field?
Right.
But is it a good way, or should the companies kind of go already in the beginning into the regulated part?
They should. So what they should actually arrive with, if they're talking with a fund like ours, is they should arrive with some sort of at least high-level understanding or of where they want to end up in terms of the regulatory pathway, right? So we will not invent this for them. And normally when they don't know if they actually want to become a digital therapeutic and a medical device, digital medical device, it shifts the value proposition tremendously, right? Because when you're taking the path of being a digital medical device, it means that you are actually, your app or whatever that is, it actually gives recommendations, like actionable recommendations on care, on any sort of interventions that the patient should do, etc. Versus when you are framing it as just a companion app for something, then the value shifts tremendously, right? And your market is different and everything is different. So the company should have a at least high-level understanding of regulatory pathway, which should be budgeted, by the way, as well, because this is, again, a whole different ballpark in terms of the budget, timing, everything.
Okay. So, questions from the audience, please. We need one more.
Maybe I have a question for them. I would like to ask the audience, actually. So, I mean, maybe, how many of you are in healthcare or in the ecosystem? Can you put your hand up, just so I... Okay. So, for those who are not, I mean, why are you not in healthcare? It's an $8 to $9 trillion economy. Yes, it's not like oil and gas. It's so complicated. Okay, there's a question.
There is an answer.
Yes, thank you, Erki, because I was listening intently, very carefully, when you were presenting the data regarding the future trends, especially aging society, and it's going to bring the new kinds of challenges which are currently not exist. I mean, solutions are not existing in the market. And when I was listening to your discussion right now, I kind of like I felt that the future reality and the current reality have not met on stage. You are addressing completely different things. Yes, it's like the future, the future patient, and the current problems. But those current problems, they do not include future solutions. That was my impression when I was listening to you. Thank you.
That's a very good point. So what do you think about the maturity of this business as such, or marketplace as such? Because, you know, when we're talking about the great future and the reality is completely different, then there is a mismatch, right? So are we too optimistic about the timelines?
I think that's a very good point, and your question is very, very valid. Look, maturity will differ based on the geography you're in, number one. Number two, the literacy of the population. We are 8 billion people, right? The literacy of the population, the awareness of the population will differ from one geography to the other. So, for example, who would think that mental health is a pandemic after COVID? COVID brought us to a new sector within healthcare that now a lot of investments are coming into mental health. Female tech, femtech. So again, the blockchain was a beautiful way, and cryptocurrency was an amazing technology that has progressed. But in the days or the areas or the times of, for example, wars, this is a good place to use technology to, for example, transfer funds. So I think the maturity, number one, will depend on the population you're addressing. Number two, there is a lot of synergies between these different geographies when it comes to aging population. We have issues with lower fertility, chronic disease management, and I believe this will bring us, even though we say it's a futuristic perhaps solution, but these futuristic solutions are accelerated in this time of uncertainty. You might end up requiring, for example, some of the solutions and the technologies immediately, because the patient convenience and awareness differs from one person to another, from one nation to another. So yes and no, but it depends on the population you're addressing. Saudi Arabia, we were just there last week with an Estonian delegation. They are expanding their investment into healthcare. They have issues with their chronic disease management, and they are literally in light speed. They are trying to leapfrog the US in a lot of deregulation aspects, right? But yet they don't have a HIPAA-like regulation or a GDPR regulation, which shows you there is opportunities there. Africa, because of the lack of infrastructure when it comes to telecom, they are fast tracking into wireless communication. And Rwanda, the twin sister of this country, is another example of sometimes you might need to accelerate some of those futuristic solutions because the immediate need comes up all of a sudden. And COVID is a great example. We are talking about cross-border data, health data exchange. People are saying, oh, that's not really a good idea before COVID. But now, because of COVID, we are talking about e-health passports. where your data in the power of your citizen and resident could actually transport and travel with you wherever you travel.
Sergey, what is your tolerance level from the time-wise? How far ahead are you looking when you're making investment?
Yeah, so we're a longevity-focused fund. By the way, I think your point is very to the point. Before talking about how we go to Mars, we need to deal with the problems in our backyard, right? So that's kind of where I am as well. But normally, like longevity-wise, you can kind of split it in 3 tiers as an industry. One, first tier happening now. All of your apps, all of your Garmins, Apple Watches, whatever, they're already providing you with kind of cautious approach to your health, what to do, what not to do, how many calories have I burned, maybe I should go run instead of eating for 10th time a day, right, etc. So that's like the tier number 1 societal adoption. Tier number 2 is, for me, it's age-related diseases, right? So immuno-oncology, how do we fight cancer, prevent cancer, figure out something with Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, et cetera, et cetera. So everything that kills us and 50% of us in this room will get in one way or another as we age. I do apologize, it's just statistics, right? And then the third tier is sci-fi stuff. Life preservation, cryonics, everything. It's not BS, it's just not there yet as a concrete tech, right? So it's very, very much fundamental science. So we're in the second tier. Right, so which is like 5 to 8 years to adoption.
We are almost out of time. Silja, last question to you. Dream big. Describe me microvention in 5 years.
Microvention in 5 years. Well, we have definitely conquered some new interesting markets, and most probably also in this side that we are actually talking here and hinting. And well, we have been growing steadily, but based on evidence, our track record is clean. We have this kind of good, how to say, well, we have fulfilled all the requirements in a sense of clinical evidence, benefits.
How many lives
everywhere.
have you touched?
Sorry?
How many lives have you touched?
How many lives have we touched? No, I would say too many. So I think we are going well, but there are some, of course, it's not an easy path. There was a discussion before as well, so health tech and medtech and digital therapeutics, it's not the easy path to take, but there is a lot to win if you really aim for the clear target and you understand what problem you're solving. And I think we know that.
All right. So thank you, panelists. Thank you, audience, for listening to us. I think we have kind of learned that we are building this future piece by piece, and patience is the key in healthcare. So thank you very much.